Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rocketeer. It's been raining and windy out, not very nice out for a launch, so I decided to start working on my Mystic Buzz, which you can see off to the right. Now, I have done this build before, but during the summer it met an unfortunate fiery end. So I really like the rocket, decided to rebuild it. I'll show you a link to in the description to a previous build video on this if you want to follow that. But anyways, during the build, I made a mistake. So that proves that yes, even experienced rocket builders can make mistakes. And I'll show you what that was and how I recovered from it. And along the way, I learned a couple of things and tried out some new materials. I'll share them with you too. So let's get started. I'm inspecting the work on my Mystic Buzz and I'm admiring the nice smooth fins. I'll show you how I did that. I used a new product on that. And I'm checking out the fillets. I have a video on that. I'll post it in the link. And that's when I noticed that, I forgot the rail button. Yes, it's missing. So it's all glued up on the end. There's no easy way to get that in there. I had to think about that for a few minutes, but I'll show you. It's not terribly difficult. It does take a little bit of time. You could also use the same technique to repair a rail button that's been damaged from pulling the rocket from a tree or something like that. So I'll show you how I did it. I drilled a hole in the motor mount. As you can see, it's now covered with a piece of brass. I did think I could have glued a dime or a penny over it too, but nice thing about brass is you can cut it with tin snips and shape it however you want with the Dremel, so it kind of follows the curve of the motor mount. But you don't have to do that. It just looks nice when you're done. Now the rail buttons are, let me move it a little closer. Those are from railbutton.com. I'll put a link in the descriptions. They come in colors like orange and yellow and green, which is kind of fun. And they come with the hardware that you need. So what I did was I drilled a hole in there and then I used a product called sticky tack or tacky strips or whatever. These are used for mounting pictures or paper or something lightweight on a wall. And I found that to be a really good medium to use on the end of a small 1/4-inch dowel or so. Put a little blob on there and then I put the nut on there and then I put it at an angle so that I could get it just right angle inside the airframe so that I could tighten down the rail button. And yeah, it took a little fiddling around, but I managed to get it on there and get it secure. And then once it was secure, I thought I should put some epoxy or something like that on the end of it, which is normally what I would do, use epoxy putty or something like that. But now it's a little more difficult to reach. So what I did was I tried a product that I've been using around the home recently. It's called E6000. And this stuff has some unique properties that worked really well for this repair and for some other things that I used it on too. But I took an acid brush, or you could put it on a dowel or something like that just as well. But I put a blob of it on the acid brush and I brushed it on there, a thick layer of it. And then I also used the same glue to put on the brass end piece to seal the whole thing up. So the nice thing about the E6000 is it sets up similar to epoxy in that it's not rock hard, but yet it's still very durable. And it doesn't have the smell that epoxy does. Now, my wife can smell as soon as I start mixing epoxy, as soon as I pour it out of the tube, the 5 to 30 minute kind that's available at hardware stores and big box retailers. She can smell that right away. And I admit it does stink a lot. So in my small basement studio, it kind of smells kind of bad. So I found out the E6000 is a good substitute for some things like attaching the rail button. And I also used it on the eye bolt that goes through the forward bulkhead. I just put a nice amount of it on there, again with a brush. You can just squeeze out of the tube and then you're done. So I found the stuff really handy. So let me know if it works out for you just as well. Another product that I used during the build is this Varathane wood hardener. I found that it does a really good job of sealing the plywood fins on the Mystic Buzz. And I put 2 coats on there. I also noticed that if you get a drip or a run or something like that, that you can just reapply the product and it will smooth it out. I sanded in between coats and it made for a really strong, durable finish. Also, I've used it on wood that I've got from, say, Hobby Lobby or something like that, some craft wood that is not quite the same quality as the Lock Precision plywood fins, which are really great, by the way. but it will stiffen the plywood a little bit. And sometimes the plywood doesn't have quite the same smooth surface to it. So I found that it will fill and make the plywood a little bit stiffer, which is always a bonus. I've also used it on airframes. Say at the beginning here where the shock cord comes out, it can tend to yank on the airframe. And if you put the wood hardener on there, it will add some stiffness to the inside of the airframe. And I found that's very helpful. But one thing to keep in mind too is it's really thin and it will tend to run. So make sure you kind of wipe your brush off a little bit before you apply it to anything. And it can cause the wood to swell slightly. So if your nose cone or your airframe fits a little bit tight, you may not want to use the product because it could cause it to be a little bit too tight. You can go back and sand some of it, so you might be able to get away with that. But the product also has some extended warnings on it as far as exposure to it. So you want to use a well-ventilated area. It talks about brain damage and permanent nerve damage. So all those things sound kind of scary to me. It does have a strong solvent smell, but if you do it out in the garage, something like that, it dries pretty quick and you shouldn't have any problem with it. So I hope that tip helps you. I just want to offer a couple of tips before I go. I've flown this rocket for several years with motor ejection. In other words, the ejection charge is contained in the motor. The other option is to use dual deployment, and you can upgrade the kit to dual deployment if that's something you want to do. I used a Jolly Logic chute release, which I highly recommend if you don't do dual deployment, because this rocket will go very high on a 54 millimeter motor, and it just really simplifies the recovery if it lands fairly close to you. The shock cord is nylon, and so I would recommend a nylon shock cord cover that is flame resistant that will help prolong the life of it. Or for a few more bucks, you can upgrade to a 1/4 inch Kevlar shock cord that works just great. That's something I do recommend. Yeah, it's a little bit more money, but the shock cord will last a long time if you plan on flying the rocket often. Just one last quick tip before we go. For dual deployment, I like to put a brass strip into the top of the airframe. It's only 5/1000ths of an inch thick, and then my 256 shear pins go through the brass plates. I use 2 of them to hold the nose cone on. And what that does is, at apogee, where the airframe separates, it will keep the nose cone from popping off and keep the parachute in the payload bay where it belongs until you need it. If you have any other building tips or anything you'd like to share with me, please post them in the comments. That's how we all learn. Thanks. Well, that's all for today. If you liked the video, give me a thumbs up, hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new video releases. This is a small channel that relies on viewer sponsorship. So if you like the video, you want to contribute to the channel, please buy me a coffee or use that YouTube super thanks. Send me $1 or $2. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, I'll see you soon in the next video.